Hey guys, and welcome back. This is our SOL 9 U.S. Imperialism and World War I lecture. All right, so, and by the way, the term imperialism, what does imperialism mean? I always say it's when might makes right. Basically, a country that is stronger imposes its will on a country that is weaker. It can impose its will politically through the military, or it can impose its will economically through money, okay? Let's take a look. So during the age of American imperialism, the United States is going to intervene, get involved in world affairs to pursue money, economic interests. We want money, therefore we're going to get involved in Latin America, in Asia, and in the Pacific. Look, we're spreading our wings over the world, basically flexing our muscle. Okay, so one of the first examples of this is the Spanish-American Wars, a little overview. In 1895, Cuban revolutionaries started fighting for independence, all right? Many Americans are sympathetic to this, all right? The USS Maine is off the coast of Cuba and Havana Harbor, and it explodes. Now, later investigation says that it probably blew up from inside. Maybe the boiler blew up. But everybody blamed it on the Spanish. They said a Spanish mine sunk it. So President McKinley asked Congress to authorize military intervention. He calls for 125,000 troops, and Spain declares war on us. We beat Spain without a lot of trouble. All right, the Battle of Manila Bay is one-sided. We sail in circles around the Spanish fleet and crush them. It's embarrassing, right? The Battle of San Juan Hill, there's some bloody fighting, but the 1st, 9th, and 10th Cavalry take the heights that overlook strategic points in Cuba, and Spain surrenders. All right, there's the Battle of Manila Bay. These are modern American warships blasting the Spanish Navy to smithereens. Okay, very one-sided naval battle. Here's the famous Battle of San Juan Hill. Teddy Roosevelt was Secretary of the Navy at the time. He said, you know what, I'm Secretary of the Navy, but I really would like to form a cavalry unit and take it to war. And so he forms the Rough Riders, okay, not of like DMX fame, like these are Rough Riders like cavalrymen, and they become famous for their exploits at San Juan Hill. All right, here's Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, okay, cavalrymen. All right, the U.S. easily defeats Spain, right? We say that we have the right, because we defeated Spain and helped the Cubans secure independence, we have the right to intervene in Cuban affairs. As a result of all of this, we get a bunch of Spanish territories too. We get the Philippines, we get Puerto Rico, we get Guam, we annex them. Annex means claim. We claim them for our own. Here's the USS Maine that blew up, by the way. Look at these political cartoons. This is how we portray ourselves. We're liberating Cuba by blasting the Spanish out of Cuba. Here's how Spain portrays us. We're greedy, and we're gobbling up all of these territories. Okay, take a look at this. This says, the American flag has not been planted in foreign soil to acquire more territory, but for humanity's sake. So it says that we're not doing this because we're imperialists. We're doing it to help humanity. We were after territory. Okay, let's be honest about it. All right, so it's around this time that we add the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Remember the Monroe Doctrine? We're different. Good fences make good neighbors. No colonization, and Europe stay out. If you leave us alone, we leave you alone. That foreign policy doctrine directed at Europe. Well, now we're going to add to those 4 tenets of the Monroe Doctrine. We're going to say, basically, we have the right to intervene in conflicts in the Western Hemisphere. We're the police for the Western Hemisphere, according to the Roosevelt corollary that is added to the Monroe Doctrine. See Teddy Roosevelt there? He's always wearing a cowboy hat. Anytime you see him in a political cartoon, he's wearing a cowboy hat. He loved that. Even if they were making fun of him, he was like, oh, look, they put a cowboy hat on my head. That's awesome. All right, so here's an example. We encouraged Panama to declare independence from Colombia. Why? Well, hey, take a look at this. Here's Panama. This is South America. Central America's up here. North America's up here. You can dig a little ditch across this isthmus, this land bridge, and build a canal. And now instead of going all the way down around South America, you can sail right through there. That is a strategic and economically valuable point, right? So we encourage Panama to declare independence from Colombia so that we can then negotiate a treaty to build the Panama Canal. We retain control of the Panama Canal all the way up until the year 2000. All right, there you go. Panama Canal, quick access around to the Pacific. Major strategic and economic waterway. Okay. In Hawaii, we annex Hawaii. We claim Hawaii. Hawaii was an independent kingdom. It was ruled by a monarch named Queen Liliuokalani. This is Sanford Dole. Sanford Dole and his fellow farmers, these are sugarcane planters and fruit farmers, they said, hey, we're going to hatch a little plan. Basically, what we're going to do is attack the Hawaiians and then claim that the Hawaiians are attacking us and ask the United States for help. And this will give the United States an excuse to send in the Marines and overthrow the Hawaiian monarchy, and that's what they do. Now, later it comes out that this happened, and they try to reverse course. But by that point, the naval base at Hawaii was too important, and so we annexed Hawaii. So we deposed the Hawaiian monarchy, Liliuokalani. And then Senator John Hay suggests an open door policy with China. So China, at this point in history, is going through a little bit of a downturn as far as its economy and its strength. It's kind of a weakened country, and the European powers are all vying for competition, for influence there. And the United States is really worried that the European countries are just going to take over China and colonize it and divide it up amongst themselves. And the U.S. does not want to be booted out of China. So the United States says we're going to have an open door policy with China in which we respect Chinese law and observe fair competition when trading with China. Basically, we want to prevent European powers from taking control of Chinese markets. All right, think about it like this, though. Are we really doing that out of the kindness of our hearts because we want China to stay free and independent? No. We want to hold back all that European competition because we want a seat at the table, a big seat at the table. Okay, take a look at this. Here's another political cartoon. Uncle Sam is ordering off the menu. Does he want a Cuba steak? Does he want a Puerto Rico pig? Does he want Philippine islands, Hawaiian islands? Well, I hardly know which to take first. So he's ordering up territory like a restaurant menu. Take a look at this one. What statement is this political cartoon making? What does Uncle Sam look like to you? He's kind of a big looming figure. You've got Spanish in Cuba. You've got Hawaiians. You've got the Japanese on the horizon, Armenians, Venezuelans, right? And Uncle Sam, he's bigger than all of them, and he's wagging his finger at them. He's kind of like a parent scolding his children. So it's kind of derisive. It's kind of condescending, right? They're saying that the United States is like the parent of the Western Hemisphere, and we're wagging our finger at all these other countries, and we're policing them. Okay, take a look at this one. Uncle Sam's got a big old fork, and he says, "You fellows stand back while I try these oyster sandwiches myself." And this is us gobbling up what? Deposing Liliuokalani, holding back all the Europeans and the Japanese, and having it all for ourselves. Here's a different take on it. This is portraying the United States as what? The protector, right? We're the protector of Puerto Rico, Panama, and the Philippines. So this is trying to argue that we're doing it to protect these places and not take their resources. All right. Let's look at U.S. involvement in World War I. World War I is a unnecessary and absolutely horrific war. Basically, by 1914, the countries of Europe are in a tangled mess of alliances that pretty much guarantee if any two of them go to war, they're all going to go to war. And the problem here, too, is industry and technology has increased the weapons of war but the generals had no idea how to fight. And so countless, millions of people are going to die horrible deaths. Europe is going to be ravaged. In Europe, they don't call this World War One. They call it the Great War, and it looms large in their social memory. So, on the Allied side, you've got Great Britain, France, and Russia. The U.S. is not involved yet. We're going to stay neutral for 3 years because we are isolationists. We're isolationists when it comes to Europe. We're all up in China's business and Hawaii's and Cuba's and everything because there's money to be made. But we don't want to do anything in Europe because it's a tangled mess and we want to stay out of it. We're isolationists when it comes to Europe. Now, central powers are Germany, Austria, Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Remember the Ottomans? All right, that empire is crumbling at this point, and World War I is going to be the last nail in the coffin. So the Ottoman Empire will collapse, and that has a little bit to do with why this war broke out too. Okay, check this out. This is one of the reasons why World War I was so destructive. And there's a couple things going on in this photo. First of all, this right here is a machine gun. You can see the belt of ammo being fed into it. It's got this big barrel because it's water cooled. They put water in the barrel. That would keep the gun from melting, so they could shoot hundreds of rounds per minute. Then they would switch the barrel out with a fresh barrel. These guys have gas masks going on because chemical and biological weapons were used to a great extent during World War I. You just die in the nastiest way. Okay? All right. The trenches are a very major part of World War I. Because of these machine guns and modern artillery, basically everybody's just going to dig in. And these soldiers lived out their lives fighting and dying in these trenches. And so you've got a reserve trench, support trench, here's a communications trench, this is the frontline trench network. And then periodically, there would be a major artillery barrage. So they would hit the enemy trenches with artillery. And then these poor souls, hundreds of thousands of troops would come up out of the trenches, charge across no man's land into a hail of machine gun fire with the intention of jumping down into the enemy trenches and somehow seizing ground. It never really worked that way, though. Hundreds of thousands of men, millions of men, in wave after wave, would come up out of the trenches and die. And the generals really couldn't think outside of the box, so they would just do it over and over and over again. And so many people died for no reason. All right, this is no man's land. This is the nightmare hellscape that is between the trenches. It's been hit, every square inch of it has been hit by artillery. It's burned at the burnt husks of trees and the remains of buildings. I actually read a horror story one time, and it was about how wild men inhabited no man's land, and they were deserters from both sides, and they lived out there and fed off the corpses of the dead stuff. It's just, creepy stuff. It's not true. But no man's land was for sure a horrifying, nightmarish place. All right, look at this. Like the face of the moon, chaotic, crater-ridden, uninhabitable, awful, the abode of madness. No man's land. You describe this theory. These holes are artillery impact craters that would fill with water and then would fall into them and drown. It's just a unimaginable place, right? Like something from out of this world. Look at these songs. In 1915, the hit song was "I Didn't Raise My Boy to Be a Soldier." This is in the United States. The #1 song in the U.S. in 1915 was "I Didn't Raise My Boy to Be a Soldier." Let's look at the lyrics. "I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. I brought him up to be my pride and joy. Who dares to put a musket on his shoulder to shoot some other mother's darling boy? Let nations arbitrate," that means resolve, "their future troubles. It's time to lay the gun and sword away. There'd be no war today if mothers all would say, I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier." Clearly a lot of isolationist sentiment, right? Let's look at the #1 song in the United States in 1918 and see if you can tell me the difference. 1918 is "Johnny, Get Your Gun," right? Well, the song is actually called "Over There." So this is "Over There." "Johnny, get your gun. Get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away, no delay. Go today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to pine, to be proud her boys in line. How do we go from I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier to Johnny, get your gun in just 3 years? What changed? Let's take a look. Well, one thing was German submarine warfare. The Germans had built a bunch of submarines, and they were using them to try to strangle the British and their allies, and they were sinking U.S. shipping. The United States believed in freedom of the seas, so the submarine warfare really made us mad. Okay, all right. We also had traditional ties to Great Britain. Remember, the original English colonies, so we're more tied to Britain than we are to Germany. Woodrow Wilson also says that we need to make the world a safe place for democracy. So we're going to get involved in World War I because submarine warfare ties to Britain, and this idea Wilson is convincing Americans we need to get involved to make the world safe for democracy, right? So we want to enlist. Our soldiers and war materials are going to tip the balance of the war and lead Germany's defeat. Okay. So Wilson gives a 14-point speech. This is his 14-point speech, famous speech, to assure the U.S. of reasons for entering World War I. Let's take a look. One of the ideas from the 14-point speech that he talks about is self-determination. He says nations should choose their own identity. All right, nations should be able to govern themselves and choose their own destiny. Now, he's saying this, but in practice, it's not going to apply to all countries. There are some countries after World War I that we're going to treat kind of like colonies. We're going to call them mandates, but they're going to be like colonies. So not all nations are going to get self-determination after World War I. Wilson also says we need freedom of the seas. We should not be harassed by German submarines. We should be able to trade with who we want. We should have freedom of the seas. And he calls for a league of nations. Basically what he's saying is we should have a world government where all of the nations of the world send representatives together to talk about and solve global problems. So instead of going right to the fighting, we have a League of Nations where we discuss this. Now, we don't have a League of Nations today. We have the United Nations. The League of Nations was a really good idea, but it doesn't quite work out. Let's see why. Here's the U.S. Marine Corps at Belleau Wood. This is an actual photo. These are U.S. Marines fighting in World War I. Belleau Wood, famous battle, right? The Marines ended up being very tough opponents, and so they actually get the nickname after Belleau Wood of Hellhound, right, or Devil Dog, right? It says Tüpfelhunde, right? So the Germans said that the Marines were like devil dogs, right? And the Marines loved that. They were like, devil dog, we'll take it, right? So the Marines distinguished themselves, fought with distinction at Belleau Wood, pushed the Germans back. Second Battle of the Somme, we start to see the beginnings of mechanized warfare, which helps in part to break the deadlock of the trenches. The first tanks start to roll out, right? Take a look at these recruiting posters. These are great, right? Look at this one. This one is one of my favorites. Daddy, what do you do in the Great War? He's like, oh man, hang on, let me think of something real quick, right? You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be put on the spot. You want to have known that you did your part, right? So they're trying to guilt people into enlisting. This says, join the Army Air Service and be an American Eagle. We didn't have an Air Force yet. The Air Force back then was part of the Army. And then we kicked him out. No, I'm just kidding. We formed a separate service. Okay. All right. Treaty 9C or Standard 9C is the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations. So the Treaty of Versailles ends World War I. All right. And there's going to be some problems with the Treaty of Versailles. One of them is France and England want to punish Germany. Well, hey, we just fought a terrible war with Germany. Why not punish them? What do you think is going to happen if we punish Germany? People in Germany are going to be miserable and desperate, and it's going to pave the way for the rise of Hitler. So punishing Germany is just going to lead to World War II. We create the League of Nations, but it's doomed to fail. More on that later. European boundaries are redrawn and new nations are created. right? And we get the mandate system. Remember how I said Wilson said in his 14-point speech that nations in the world should have self-determination, they should govern themselves and follow their own destiny. Well, he didn't mean that for countries like Palestine, Iraq, and Jordan. They became mandates. When you think of a mandate, just think of a colony. Basically, what we said was, oh, these guys aren't capable of governing themselves, so they'll be mandates, and we'll kind of govern them for them. Do you think that the Iraqis wanted to be governed by the British? No. Do you think that the Palestinians wanted to be governed by the French? Of course not. But they became mandates. This is imperialism. All right, look at this. Did the U.S. join the League of Nations? No. It was our idea, but we didn't join. Why? Look at the political cartoon. You got European nations, foreign nations, the Empire of Japan, England. And what are they doing? They've tied Uncle Sam's hands behind his back. He's all tied up in foreign affairs. Americans didn't like the idea of a foreign organization making foreign policy decisions for the U.S. We felt like we would be tied down. So the Senate did not approve the Treaty of Versailles, and the U.S. did not enter the League of Nations. And maybe so what? Big deal, right? All the other countries are in it. Nope, that's a problem. Oh, I went too far. Because we are the most important part. We're one of the wealthiest, most powerful nations in the world. Our troops helped turn the tide of World War I. But look at this. Here's the U.S., the Keystone, being reclined on by Uncle Sam. It should go here, but it's missing. So that means the bridge is going to collapse, right? It's weak in the center. We're the most important piece. And so in just a couple decades, well, less than a decade, because in the 1930s, Hitler's going to come along. And a devastated Europe that lost a whole generation of World War I is going to be too exhausted to stand up to Hitler. And we're not there as part of the League of Nations to stand up to Hitler. So guess what? It's going to collapse. By not joining the League of Nations, we contribute to the legacy of World War II. So, what is the legacy of World War I for the U.S.? Our entry in the war ensured an Allied victory, but it failed to bring about a lasting peace. We rejected the League of Nations, which left a bitter legacy and paved the way for Hitler to seize power in Germany and lead us to World War II. World War I was a tragic, unnecessary war that killed 20 million and wounded 21 million people. And it didn't have to happen. All right, that concludes our Imperialism and World War I lecture. Make sure you guys do the discussion board. Make sure you read the narrative and answer the questions. And make sure you do those guided notes.